So we'll kick off with our first presentation, and I'll welcome Nick Huston, who's from Daikin, also one of the trustees of Foundations Independent Living Trust. And Nick's going to rattle through some of the funding solutions that are currently available around energy efficiency. So over to you, Nick.
So thanks for the invite. Just a little bit about me. So as Paul mentioned, I'm a trustee for the Foundations Independent Living Trust, but my day job is working for Daikin, which is a manufacturer of heat pumps. My role is like a future energy business manager within that. So essentially, I work with lots of partners and just trying to help people through the whole sort of net zero journey on energy efficiency. So it's not all about heating systems; it's about insulation and fabric first and everything that goes with it. So yeah, my background's in public sector. Used to work for National Energy Action as a director as well, managing the redress programme. So very background, but essentially my role is to help and support and guide and advise and train and just be a bit of a help through this sort of entire journey, really. So yeah, I just wanted to put this slide up. I mean, I will send these slides out because there's a lot of information on them. I'm going to sort of take you through a bit of a fairly quick process in terms of funding. And there's a lot of information, but I will send some information out afterwards. I'll try and simplify some of the different funding pots, but essentially this is what's sort of underpinning all the funding out there, and it's the heat and building strategy, which was came out late last year actually, and it's really a document from government which has been used to try and, as I say, underpin all the kind of work that's happening, all the policy and funding schemes, because we're sort of in a period of pretty much unprecedented levels of funding. We've had lots of funds called like Home Upgrade Grant Scheme and Local Authority Delivery, and there literally are billions of pounds of the funding. So it's fairly high level. And this document really just provides the sort of policy and strategy behind it, why government are trying to do it. And the driving force really is to try and reduce carbon emissions. That's the sort of reason for it. But when you do reduce carbon emissions, there's lots of other added benefits like lowering energy bills, which is really important. So this is a sort of key document which, as I say, is sort of providing the support to all the funding, and it's about 200 pages long. So if you have a board one even, and you can have a peruse of it. But yeah, a lot of the funds come from this document. So yeah, and these are the kind of funds that's out there at the moment. It's a bit of a snapshot, and I will go into 3 or 4 of these in a little bit more detail. But we're in a pretty new period of pretty intense funding. It started back in sort of 2019 with the Green Homes Grant. I mean, these are all sort of fairly high level kind of funds. They're all in the sort of billions of pounds of the level. And again, as I mentioned, they're all sort of driven trying to reduce carbon emissions, but they do have lots of benefits of reducing energy bills as well. And they do cover the sort of full range of energy efficiency measures. So obviously lots of loft top-ups, cavity wall insulation, external wall insulation. They've funded lots of solar PV systems, door and window upgrades, as well as sort of heating systems like air source heat pumps. What they have stopped funding, and it's quite noticeable, is gas boilers. So a lot of these funds, or in fact the vast majority of these funds, won't fund replacement gas boilers. And this is the big shift in funding from government, is that they are trying to reduce carbon emissions in the country. And they see sort of gas as one of the fossil fuels that they're trying to reduce and remove completely altogether by 2030. So yeah, we're in a sort of period where we're switching away to renewables and other kind of non-fossil fuel heating. So that's one thing that isn't covered in these kind of funds, is lots of funding for gas boilers. But yeah, so we're in right in the middle of it really. We've had the Green Homes Grant, we've had lots of early rounds of the Local Authority Delivery Scheme. We're in the middle of the Sustainable Warmth competition. And you'll notice with government funding is that they do change the titles all the time, and they change the way the different rounds come out. So sometimes it's round 1, round 2, sometimes it's phase 1, phase 2, sometimes it's waves. They just like to mix things up. So it is quite difficult to try and keep ahead of what's exactly out there in terms of funding and criteria. But yeah, there's sort of 3 or 4 that are out there now, which I'll come to in a second. One, the Home Upgrade Grant Scheme I'll touch on. The Social Housing Decarb Fund, and we've got new eco funding as well. So they're probably the 3 biggest ones that I'll cover. And my role is very much to support organisations like yourselves, identify the funds, access them if need be. I can help you write funding bids, and just help with sort of targeted properties. And they've all got different criteria, so we've got to approach them in different ways. But yeah, that's a bit of a snapshot of all the funds, but I'll go into a couple of them in a little bit more detail. Yeah, so social housing decop funds, this in itself is like a £3.8 billion fund, so it's pretty intense fund. We've had a couple of early waves, they're calling this fund. And we've got a live round now called Wave 2, which is 800 million. So as the name sort of suggests, it is just available to social housing providers, but they have allowed sort of registered charities in there as well. And there is 30% private sector homes included as well, so which is why I put it in. So they will allow those sort of 10-year mixes, and it's very much targeted at sort of Band D properties, but they will allow quite a lot of Band C properties as well, up to 10%. There's quite a sort of sliding scale of grants available as well, depending on what measure and what construction type. But it's generally between sort of £5,000 and £16,000 of the funding for the various different measures. So it's fairly intensive funding. If it's a social housing provider, they do have to provide 50% of the cost. I think if it's a private landlord, they have to contribute a third. But if there's any sort of low income owner occupiers, they don't have to contribute anything. So there's 100% funding available for those kind of low income owner occupiers. Bids themselves have to come in either through a local authority or through a housing provider. So it's not a fund that individual households can bid into directly. It has to be through like a local authority or housing organisation. But there's lots of fees that are available to, I say fees, but like admin costs that are allowed to be included. So you can actually almost self-fund it. So if you've got an organisation who's interested in bidding for this, you can actually include quite a lot of like management costs to help sort of run it and help bring staff in to run it. And that's usually capped at about 15%, but it can add up. So the work itself has to be delivered between February next year. As I say, there's an open round now, which closes in a couple of weeks. And the work will start in February and run through to June 2025. Bids need to be like 100 properties minimum. So there's quite a few consortiums at the moment going on. So again, if it's something that you're interested in, there'll be plenty of consortiums that you'll be able to join to be part of this. There will probably be another round because it's 800 million this fund. So I fully expect it to be another round or another wave, probably the middle of next year. So this will come back. And the other big one at the moment is called like HUGs for short, or Home Upgrade Grant. And again, this is like wave 2, so it's another round of what's already been out before. They've done this slightly differently in that there's actually 2 sort of funding windows, one in November and one in January. And this is targeted purely at sort of owner occupiers in the private sector, so the complete opposite to the social housing one. But they will allow some social housing properties included, just like the other one allows sort of private sector. So this is very much Band D and below, and it's the same kind of like measures. So all the insulation, all the heating kind of measures are allowed. The grant levels are fairly similar between 5,000 and 16,000. Again, landlords have to contribute a third, social landlords 50%, but low income owner occupiers don't have to contribute anything. It is 100% funded. You've got the same sort of 15% management costs allowed in the same timescales. So yeah, this is another fund. So you've got 2 big funds, one 800 million, one 700 million, covering all the 10 years really, and you can mix and match between them as well. So, but yeah, the windows are fairly tight. So the first one closes on the 18th of November, so that's not very far away at all, but there will be a second one on the 27th of January. The boiler upgrade scheme. So this is a replacement for the Renewable Heat Incentive, or the RHI, which closed earlier on this year. So this is just for sort of renewable heating systems, in particular air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps, but it's available to everybody, including like individual households. So essentially, they've moved away from the old RHI, which was paid over 7 years, to an upfront grant. So anybody interested in having a heat pump, for example, can get £5,000 grant of the cost upfront. It's a flat rate. So it's £5,000 whether it's a small bungalow or a large house. It's sort of a flat rate of £5,000. And this scheme's going to run for 3 years, so it's going to be quite a popular scheme. The fund total is 450 million, so there's plenty of funding in there, and they expect to fund around sort of 90,000 heat pumps, and it's actually managed by Ofgem, so it keeps it quite easy. It's very much like an installer-led scheme. So if you're a household interested in a heat pump, you just need to find a local installer. They'll give you a quote, they'll access the grant for you, and they'll just essentially send you an invoice less than £5,000. So it's quite a cheap way of getting a heat pump installed. And heat pumps at the moment are very efficient to run, and they're certainly offering lower running costs than any kind of off-gas heating system like storage heaters or oil and coal systems, and even gas boilers. So yeah, heat pumps are quite a good solution in terms of running costs at the moment. But yeah, that's available to everybody. You don't have to be a local authority to access that. It's just households. Yeah, and the final sort of big fund is Eco4. So obviously Eco has been around for a long time, as you'll be very aware. But the big changes with the Eco4 is that it's more than trebled in value. So it's now £1 billion a year, and it's going to run for 4 years. So it's like a £4 billion fund. And unlike Eco3, they've shifted the focus away from gas boilers, as you can imagine, onto everything but. So again, lots of renewable heating systems are supported. But there's still very much support insulation and glazing, and everything else that sort of came under Eco3, but it's the heating element that's changed quite significantly. So I think the number of gas boilers allowed has been capped to something like 32 or 35,000. So it's a huge reduction on what's been funded before. We're still sort of waiting for the sort of full final eligibility, but it's looking pretty positive for certainly for heat pumps and things like PV systems together. So they're really focused on measures that can really reduce energy costs in a significant way. So it's the same kind of things. If you can improve EPC ratings and reduce energy costs, then you get your best values. So yeah, I'm doing a fair bit of work on this at the moment, just to try to find the sort of sweet spots of properties. So yeah, I can come back at a later date and Nico will give a bit more information. But I think as a guide, I'm talking to a few providers at the moment, and for heat pump and PV panels, they're looking to fund about £10,000 to £12,000 of the funding. So it's pretty significant. But yeah, I'll have more detail on that in the sort of coming weeks and months. Yeah, I think it's just my final slide. It's just in terms of support and my kind of role, really. So yeah, I'm more than happy coming to talk to you about any of these kind of funds in more detail. If it's help with accessing them, I can talk you through the criteria and application process. If it's identifying properties or working with some of your referral agencies, again, I can do that. So yeah, so my role is essentially just to provide this sort of in the middle support for any kind of organisations wanting to access this kind of funding, and whether it's awareness training on heat pumps or bid writing or whatever it is, I'm pretty much just here to help and support you. So yeah, please leave. I think that might be it, but just click on, yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks very much.
So in terms of heat pumps, so lots of funding of kind of coming up and available for heat pumps. What's kind of the typical price to install, and how much of the kind of the existing infrastructure, like kind of radiators and things, do you typically have to replace to get them to work?
Yeah, that's the sort of really good question, Paul. I mean, as a guide, it's around about sort of £10,000 to install a new heat pump where you're having to sort of replace new pipework and radiators. But it really depends on what you're replacing. So if the radiators are fairly new and they're sort of big enough and the pipework's okay, you probably knock a couple of £1,000 off that sort of cost. So you're looking at about £8,000. So it just depends on what's there now. Some of the cost with funding heat pump is taking out the old system. So if it's an old coal system, for example, that can be quite a messy, intrusive job to try to take all that out. But yeah, the heat pump itself is about £3,000, so it's quite a low cost. But yeah, a lot of the work comes from, do you need pipework and radiators, and how many days install it's going to take. But yeah, you do have that sort of boiler upgrade scheme of £5,000 to reduce the cost, and the running cost of heat pumps will come right down as well. So the cheaper the running the gas boiler at the moment, for example.
Okay.
So yeah, that's about a guide.
So I think probably a lot of councils and home improvement agencies would have lots of people contacting them to say that their existing gas boiler is kind of broken and may be beyond repair. What's kind of the best sources of funding to do something about that at the moment? And do you think over a period of time it's going to get to the point when there's no funding for gas boilers and it's all switching over to heat pumps of some sort?
Yeah, it's really close now. Actually, a lot of these big funds that I mentioned don't fund boilers at all. So Eco will still fund a few boilers. I'm sure Amanda will cover redress soon. But yeah, we're already sort of seeing the sort of transition away from gas boiler funding. So there's very little funding for that. But we are seeing really switch over in terms of like running costs. So there's lots of new initiatives out there to try and, I don't know if anybody remembers the old sort of economy 10 and economy 7 tariffs where you had sort of day and night. We're going to have something similar for heat pumps where you'll have a very cheap tariff to run your heat pump. So they'll be a lot cheaper to run than any kind of gas boiler. I mean, they're cheaper now, but they'll be considerably cheaper the next sort of 6 to 12 months when all these new tariffs come out. So
right. So the electric to run your heat pump will be cheaper than the electric for the rest of your house, is that?
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So I think the electric tariff's now about 34 pence, and quite a few of the energy companies are looking at it. A bit like what you have for electric cars. So you have a separate tariff for electric car charging.
That's usually based on the time, though, isn't it? So
yeah, so it'll run the same way. So you can run your heating system to try and capture all that off-peak times. So if you have to heat your hot water cylinder up, for example, the normal settings to do that is like 7 to 8 in the morning. But if Octopus Energy said if you do that at 5 o'clock instead, you can have it at a third of the cost, and that's what we'll do. So it's these kind of little tweaks and changes.
Okay. So in terms of contacting Nick, if we share your email in the chat,
yeah, please do.
Can email you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there any planning implications for air source heat pumps?
Generally, no. There's heat pumps come under what's called like permitted development. So like 90% of all cases, it's fine. You don't need planning permission at all. The only time you would do is if it's like a listed building or conservation area, then you would need planning. But generally, most of the time, it's permitted development, so it's allowed without planning.
Great. And Martin's asking, so in terms of installing heat pumps, how much do you kind of have to look at the existing property, which I guess he's kind of thinking about how well insulated it is as kind of part of the installation?
Yeah, that's a really big part of it. And yeah, the two, because unlike a gas boiler, which tends to be sort of very oversized, you tend not to worry about putting a gas boiler into a property and you turn the boiler on and off all the time to try and keep your house cool or warm. And if you run a bath, you have to put cold water in generally because it's too hot coming out the tap. So heat pumps designed just for that building. So yeah, so it tends to be designed out a little bit better. I forgot the question, Paul. What was the original question?
About kind of how much you need to, I suppose, improve the insulation.
Yeah, the insulation. So yeah, that's right. So because it's you're running it really efficiently, you've got to make sure that the heat you generate doesn't escape, essentially. So yeah, you do have to make sure that it's fairly well insulated. By that I mean you've got obviously the obvious things like you've got to check the cavities have been filled, the loft's been topped up, the glaze needs to be at least double glaze, and the sort of grey area probably comes from a solid wall. Because some solid wall properties are fairly sort of thin walls and the heat will escape through those. Some solid wall ones are very thick and they'll be actually quite well insulated. Yeah. So we do like what's called like a heat loss calculation before any install. And you just work through that. But yeah, it's really important, insulation.
And there's one final question from David. So he was talking about, are you aware of any kind of charities that might partner with housing associations or local authorities to kind of give independent advice around energy efficiency?
Yeah, there is actually. So I know Groundwork. I've got like a Green Doctor scheme, so they're very good at that. We've worked with quite a few citizens' advice in the regions. Again, they've done that. I know some of the redress scheme. Again, Mandy will cover that. They do a lot of really good advice as part of that kind of project. So yeah, there's plenty of charities out there who offer that kind of energy advice scheme, and it is really important as well because we're fully aware that heat pump is different to any kind of heating system. So you have to get the education right and make sure on the right tariff, and yeah, so it's really important. So yeah, I support anybody wanting to partner up with a charity to help with that.
Yeah, and as you say, kind of Amanda from the Energy Saving Trust is on the
webinar
later. So there may be some opportunities to bid for funding around that. Great, thanks, Nick. That's been really useful. We've shared your email address in the chat, so I'm sure your inbox will be flooded at any minute now.
Thanks very much.
Okay.